Okay, here we go.
Test, 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 test.
Roll music?
Let's roll it.
Welcome to the Unknown Morning Show.
It's the show where we explore radio,
Podcasting,
TV,
gear,
gearheads,
and making money with a hot mic and other stuff too.
This is the Unknown Morning Show.
I'm Mandee Montana.
And I'm Chuck McKinley. One of our favorite, all-time favorite people in the chair with us today, Dave Moreland. Hi, Dave.
Hey, Chuck. How are you?
Doing terrific. So, some background on Dave. Dave Moreland has been in East Texas radio programming for what, over 40 years now?
Do we have to say that? Yes. Yeah. 73.
73.
That's much more than 40.
When I think about you as a programmer, and first of all, I always think about, and I think I've said this before, that any of us that have aspired to be programming or just try to study would always think about on how you do stuff. But when I think about you, I think of to me, there's two specific periods, and I know there's more, and I know you've done a lot of stuff, but I always think of KTYL in the 80s, and I think of KOOI, and I think of them in terms because I thought each of them were distinct franchises.
Yes.
I came to town in 84. When did you start programming KTYL?
I started programming KTYL in 86, 85, 86, somewhere. It's been a long time, but 85, 86, somewhere in that time.
I don't know when I first listened to it, but the thing was, and when I say out of market, it's kind of like whether it's a voice or a sound or whatever, I heard it and I went, wow, this is something not Tyler. It was everything. Like the old top 40 parlance, light, bright, tight. It was just tight as a drum. The music was right on. The jingles were there. The talent was there. And I listen and I just go, whoa, what the heck? How did you get the KTYL job? Where did you come from?
All right. So it's been a long, strange trip. I started in radio in 72. I worked in Nacogdoches at a beautiful music station, KEFM, which became KJCS. It was an interesting trip because we recorded all of our intros over music beds, and it was all true elevator music. So you would hit the music bed and you'd go, from KJCS, Montavani. And that's how you would.
Yeah.
And so I worked there, I think, probably 6 months. I got the call to go to KFRO in Longview, which was AC at the time. And they wanted me to do mornings.
Was that 95.3 too?
We don't know. Back in those days, we were the steady 1370.
I was about to say 1370 AM. Yeah.
Okay.
One of the first stations I worked on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I go and interview with Mary Helen.
Bear?
Everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything goes well. She says, "Hey, we want you to do mornings." I said, "Okay, I'll see you in 2 weeks." I'm this 19-year-old kid. I don't know anything, and I'm pretty full of myself.
Did you feel full? Did you say, I'm Dave Moreland and I'm doing mornings on a radio station?
I did until I walk in. I was going to see you in 2 weeks. I'll start on Monday, June 1st or something. And so I walk in 5 a.m. Monday, June 1st, and there's a guy sitting in the chair, and I go, hey, I'm Dave Moreland. I'm the new morning guy. And he says, well, hi, I'm Bob Scott. I'm the new morning guy. And I go,
that's called a conflict.
And turns out Mary Helen got a good read on me. She understood I was just this punk kid. And I didn't reach back out to her in that 2-week interim. And so she decided, hey, this flake's not going to show up. So she had another guy in her pocket, and she brought Bob in to do mornings because she thought I wasn't going to show up. So what does Mary Helen do? Well, the poor afternoon guy's the odd man out. She let the afternoon guy go, and she moves me to afternoons. And so for 3 months, I work afternoons at KFRO looking for a job the whole time. And I finally get an offer from KDOK, and I come to KDOK to work weekend overnights. And so I leave KFRO to work at KDOC weekend overnights because at that time, KDOC was something.
1330, right?
1490.
They were the big rocker.
They were the big rocker, and everybody had worked there.
It seems like we were talking about the Texas Radio Hall of Fame. When you read bios and information about folks, everybody went through there that was anybody.
Everybody that was anybody went through there. Jimmy Rabbit, Bill Young, Steve Lundy.
Yeah.
I mean, lots and lots of big dog people. And at the time, we had a terrific staff. We had Tim Case, Jack Monroe, Bill Atkins. Bill Atkins, who was a fixture in this market.
Sure.
And as we would say, he's a horseman. Bill Atkins could do anything at that radio.
So did he jock?
He jocked.
Oh.
At that point, he was the morning guy.
I only know I only knew
become news.
Bill doing news at BB.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He
ATBB.
could do it all.
Wow.
And we had Bill Young as a consultant. And Bill Young would drive in every month and tell us what we were doing. And you never been air checked till you've been air checked by Bill Young. I'll tell you that.
How'd that go?
Well, he spared nothing. And most everybody knows Bill Young as the PD of Kilt, but you also know him as the great classic rock jock voice. All of the classic
Spot commercials. Oh
were done
yeah.
by Bill Young.
Oh yeah.
And so he was quite the talent. Long story short, I worked at KDOC from 73 to 76. Had an issue, a family emergency. I had to go back and help out the family business.
Okay.
So I was out for 10 years. And that's generally something you don't come back from.
You were out for 10. I never knew that.
I went for 10 years doing intros over songs while I'm in the car. I never heard a song come on in the car that I wasn't introing.
And when you hit the post, did it make you happy?
Yes.
We had that conversation at the radio station the other day, hitting the post.
And nobody but us cares about that.
No, of course
The
not.
listeners
Nobody cares.
Listeners don't like it, as a matter of fact.
No.
So anyway, I'm doing the home business, and Janie Baker calls and says, "Hey, we got the guy that does the Saturday night special is sick. Could you come in and do it?" Because I'd talked to Janie, I'd still stayed in touch with Janie, and I said, "Well, sure, I can do a Saturday night special. That's nothing." Saturday night special at the time was a classic rock show. And so, I literally came in with 2 milk crates full of my albums.
Did you get to do that?
Yeah.
Isn't that lovely?
It's the greatest thing
My
ever.
first gig, we were able to do that to where we could play a couple cuts a night. And this includes things like George Carlin, Cheech Chong, stuff like that.
And it was so much fun that I think it was, it wasn't Rhonda. I don't remember who was coming on it. It was Kelly Barnett. Kelly Barnett was coming on at midnight because, it was 24 hours then.
Yeah.
Sure.
She was coming on at midnight, and I said, "Kelly, you're just gonna have to wait a while. We're on a roll here." So instead of ending at midnight, I think we went on until about 1.
There you go.
Then, we finally just said, "Okay, it's all yours, Kelly." So that evolved into doing weekends at KTYL, and Jeff Brown, who was the PD of KTYL at that time, got an opportunity to go to work in Syracuse.
Wow.
And this is a big,
Nice jump.
big jump.
Huge jump.
And so the PD job came open, and Janie said, "You really ought to apply." And I said, "Janie, I'm a part timer." And Dan Walters, who was a sales manager at the time, who I'd known for many years too, said, "You ought to apply." So I apply, and lo and behold, I get the job. Nobody goes from weekends to the PD, but I did.
Well, you had
And
some
you did.
experience.
The stars were aligned, and I got in.
But you probably were talking to people, whether it was Janie Baker, whether it was Dan, and they're going, "Yeah, he needs to be our leader."
Yeah. And so we get in. I get the job. And that's when I learned the first rule of being a PD. Don't screw it up. Because we had a good station.
Yeah.
Don't come in, Dave, and try to do everything you think needs to be changed. Come in, listen to the station, get to know your staff, and then maybe tweak it, but don't screw it up. So that's what we did.
In other words, it's kind of like if you became the coach of, I was going to say the Dallas Cowboys, but I didn't want to say that. Like New England Patriots, they're very successful. Your job is to come in, talk to folks, make sure that everybody's ego's in line, make sure everything's set, and not screw it up. Was KTYL number 1 in town then?
KTYL struggled to be number 1, but we could never beat KNUE. We did eventually. After I became PD, I think 1 or 2 books we beat KNUE. But it was a struggle. KNUE's a monster.
Yeah.
And we had trouble beating KNUE, but we did a couple of times. But they were always a strong number 2.
How many watts power did you guys have?
We were 100,000.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So we were an AC station, but we leaned more rock because we had been rock in the past, and they kind of transitioned over to AC because it's a little easier to sell. But we were a rock-leaning AC.
Okay, when you say that, was it something to where what you probably did is just day parted a lot?
We didn't do that much day parting.
Well, then how did you
we just played more cuts with edge to them.
Okay.
When our consultant George Williams came in, we've had many consultants over the years, some better than others. George was an excellent consultant. But when George came in, the first thing he said was, "Dave, I don't like fuzzy guitars. Do you?" And I said, "Yeah, George, I kind of dig those fuzzy guitars." And he said, "Well, I don't think we need to have the fuzzy guitars on KTYL. So let's turn those back." And by fuzzy guitars, it was just his way of saying a little harder edge to them.
Sure.
So he tweaked it back a little, but we never completely got away from our rock heritage. But that's what we were. And for 10 years, I was the PD at KTYL, and we did well. But think about the staff we had.
Yeah.
We had Bill Davis and Bobby Kearns in the morning.
Yes.
We had Janie Baker in the afternoons. In the middays, we had me in the afternoons and Jeff Wills at night.
Yeah.
And, it was a really strong staff.
Who did overnights? Because I saw a picture you posted about a month ago, and I saw, Kenny Smith.
Kenny Smith did overnights briefly.
Okay.
Maybe not briefly, but for 6 months.
Jeff Evans?
Jeff Evans did part-time but never did overnights.
Okay.
We had a guy named Mike Keenan who did overnights. It was a revolving door. And that was part of the PD job back then was administration, because that station, any station, there had to be a warm body there 24/7. No matter what the weather, no matter what, because there was no computer. If there wasn't somebody there to change that record or change that CD, we're sung. And so more than one time, I got up at 3 a.m. and went down there to run the station, because it just had to be on. But you had, your job as PD was trying to find somebody to fill those seats all the time.
Did you feel, as far as, getting people in those seats, because KTYL has this reputation of being a good station. I'm sure the word was out on the street. Dave Moreland is a good guy to work for. Did you find that you would attract that talent as far as, because to me, when I programmed, it was like having people in part-time positions and overnights and in weekends. That was just as valuable as everything,
Absolutely. And we got a good number of people from Dallas who were applying for jobs. Mike Shepard, who was working part-time at KVIL.
Uh-huh.
We had Derek Ethan. We had Kevin Kelly. We had lots of good people from Dallas. And we got creative resumes. I'll never forget one guy sent me a tape in a used pizza box. Not just a clean pizza box, but a greasy pizza box. And I don't remember what the point was, why that pizza box had anything to do with his air check. But it got my attention.
Yes.
Yeah. And so back then, people went out of their way to try to do something creative to get your attention.
I know back in the 90s at KNUE, we had a couple of years where we had really, really good part-timers to where, we just felt that besides the regular staff, it almost made you feel invincible when you have those bodies in place that are smart, that you feel you don't have to babysit, that if the weather goes crazy, you just feel like, what's going to happen. Of course, I don't know what you did. I always had a standing rule that when I was programming, that when the weather went crazy, you got to call me. You got to let me know, regardless, even if you're there, just in case, so...
Well, you have regrets as time goes by. You don't be a PD for as many years as I've been and not have regrets. I have regrets. When I started, PDs were different. We were still more the military style. It's my way or the highway. I'm telling you to do this, you do it. And there were tape
You were
cartridge-
that way?
I was.
Really?
There were tape cartridges that were thrown down the hall.
Wait a minute. Are you telling me
It's hard for me to believe after
Dave
working for you,
Moreland
Dave.
had a temper tantrum?
Oh,
no.
yes. Oh, yes, we did.
What's next? Sasquatch?
You know,
Oh, my.
You know, the production room was right next to the control room. And a salesperson who shall go unmentioned liked to cut his own spots.
Okay.
And I always said, look, that's an insult to my jocks. We don't go call on your clients. Let us cut the spot.
Sure.
But he insisted on cutting his own spots. So one day he was in there and trying to cut a spot, and I stood at the door of the control room and opened it and slammed it just repeatedly, just bam, just bam, 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 just so that it would screw up his production. And then there was a...
Oh, I find this, it's just so like out of character for you.
This is
for
just
the Dave
not,
Moreland
yeah.
that I know.
It's a whole nother Dave Moreland.
I believe that.
It's the
Wow.
That's what I always tell Denise, my wife. These people today, they don't know the old Dave,
Yeah.
and they don't really want to know him. And I also developed
It's like NBC serial killer type stuff.
I developed the ability to open up the door and throw cartridges, tape cards down the hall that I didn't like, that had a problem. And I over time, I developed the ability to throw it just right. So if it hits on the edge of the cart will split open and tape will fly everywhere. It's not a good throw unless the cart splits open and tape flies everywhere.
Did you? And that made you feel good.
It did, especially when it was right by the general manager's office.
Oh,
It's wonder I wasn't fired. But anyway, but if we're getting to that point, you learn over time, and the world changes. You can't treat people that way anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do regret, you know, some. One more story. I had a poor guy that lived in Big Sandy, and he was an overnight guy, and he was young. He was 17 years old.
Oh, wow.
And we had an ice storm, and he said, "Dave, I don't think I can get over that bridge." And I said, "Well, you need to give it a try." And he said, "Well, my daddy doesn't want me to come in." And I said, "Well, you either come in or you won't have to make any more trips over that bridge." And so the poor guy's daddy drove him across the bridge and sat in the car for 6 hours while he did his shift and drove him back.
And you found out about that?
No, I knew it.
How did you feel about that?
At that time, it was just the way it was. It was him or me. I didn't want to go in. But today, I feel terrible about that, But that's the way it was. And that was accepted norm for PD behavior.
155. That's That's a horrible bridge, too.
Yeah.
J.D. Patrick, remember?
Yes.
I imagine that was after the ice storm
J.D. Patrick?
that he passed.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
This was prior to that.
That's what I meant.
I
Yeah.
would never.
That's
yes.
yeah.
But I always remember, to this day, if for some reason I've got to go over that bridge, I just kind of mumble it to my,
Yeah.
hi, J.D. And just, but yeah.
So you learn.
Well, by the time I worked for you, you were an absolute gem. Truly. And Chuck and I have talked about this off mic a lot. I can't remember if we talked about it on, but I loved working for you.
Thank you.
And my favorite sound of 106.5 was when you programmed it.
Yes.
I loved it. I loved the sound of the station. And after you left, I kind of they asked me to program the music, but I was given orders on how to do it. And it really changed the sound of the station. And it made me so sad because it was not the same.
Well, let's transition to that. Okay?
Yes.
So I was at KTYL for 10 years. KTYL was a fantastic station when Jim Stansel owned it. We were on our own little island. We were in what we called the Crystal Palace there at Biloxi and the Loop, the best view in town, looking over the Loop. It was a fantastic location. It's where Jose is now.
4 stories up.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And it was a fantastic view. And we had our call letters up there, and it was just great. And it was, and I always like to do this, we created an us against them mentality. It's us against the world, and it's here we are, this is us. And so we had a great time. And then the telecom bill was passed.
Yep. I understand.
When the telecom bill was passed, you could have multiple ownership in the station.
And you're all equal brothers and sisters.
And so all of a sudden, our number one enemy, the station we lived to beat, KNUE, was next door to my office, you know? So
Yep.
we're all in the same building. We're
Yeah.
all one happy family.
I remember that.
Except Dave, and he was miserable, you know, because that's not what I'm cut out for. I'm not a corporate guy. And I live to compete against other people, not to be in the same building with them. So from the day that we sold out and the day we moved over, I was not.
Oh, no. We knew you were very miserable. It was just, and it was so uncomfortable for us too, because we were like, well, how do we reach out? What do we do? And it was kind of, I think kind of the, you know, from our point of view as well, we'll just let them do their thing and we do ours.
Yeah.
But yeah, I totally get it, because you're competing against everybody. And when I was with KNUE in the mid-90s, I looked as anybody that played a country record was competition. 98.3 in Palestine, KYYK, certainly Kicks. I mean, you maybe be in the field, you know, and encounter Tony McCullough, be, hi, how you doing? How's Trudy? How's Rosanna? Fine. And you go on. But it's like, no, when the book comes in, yeah, we beat them.
Yeah. On an interpersonal basis, we were always friends.
Yes.
But competing, we wanted to kill them.
Yeah. But also the advertising market at that time, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was if you were in the top 5 stations, you could just make a ton of regional and national buys. You know, your head sales guys could just make a ton of money just off the fax machine.
Yes.
They didn't have to go out of the building.
Didn't have to leave the building because those faxes just rolled in.
Oh man,
Yeah.
not so much anymore. I don't think, is it? You're more probably into that than I am. Or
Yeah, we still do well with national business. We've been blessed. I'm at KBLZ now. I'm at the Blaze now, and have been for 14 years. That's the longest I've ever been anywhere. But we've been blessed, and so we do still get a lot of national business. But we're in the minority. Not that many people do.
yeah,
So anyway, back to David, KTYL. So I'm miserable, and I'm sitting at home one night, and Bobby Kearns calls me. Bobby Kearns, my former newscaster,
yes,
and still friend, but she didn't work in radio at that time. And she called me and said, Dave, how you doing? I said, I'm okay. She said, are you happy? I said, well, no, not really. And she said, well, you know, Dudley Waller would like to talk to you. And I said, really? Okay. I don't know Dudley Waller. I know he's got a big station, but I don't really know much about him, but I'll be glad to talk to him. So she sets up the appointment. I go visit with Dudley Waller. Dudley Waller, if you know him, is an impressive-looking man. He had this beautiful shock of gray hair. I never saw the man without a suit. He was of the old South. He was kind of a Southern-type gentleman. And I went down there, and he sold me. He bowled me over with what he had, because he had the greatest facilities. He had no expense.
this is in Jacksonville, right?
This is in Jacksonville.
I remember going there once and looking around. I'm going, this is the cleanest radio station ever.
Spotless. We had doormats outside every room. Of the,
Really?
You walk down the hallway, and each hallway has a door, and in front of each door, there's a doormat. So before you walk into the studio, you wipe your feet.
Wow.
So there was no room for. In other words, Dave cannot throw carts down the hall.
No. And you don't throw a cart down Dudley Waller's hall. Let me tell you that right now. So anyway, what Dudley presents to me is we have a beautiful music station. And we have done very well, but I know my audience is aging out. And I see the future transitioning to AC. So we want to take this station and transition it from beautiful music to AC.
That's really forward thinking.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. And I also want to move my morning guy out of mornings, and I'm going to replace him with you, which was uncomfortable, but you do what you have to do. You know?
Yeah.
And God bless him, Perry Andrews couldn't have been nicer to me. He had to train me. He had to, put me into his chair, and he couldn't have been nicer.
Was he kept on staff at all?
He was kept on staff. They moved him over to work on the AM, and he did the AM for a while, and then retired.
What was the AM?
The AM at that time was Kibi. It was country.
Okay. I couldn't remember the calls, but I always remembered in regards to Tom Perriman, too, for some reason.
So we had this amazing facility. Truly, Dudley was big with the ABC networks. Paul Harvey came down one time and did the show from
Wow.
Whoa.
He broadcasted it from there. Paul said, and it was posted on the wall, broadcasting from a facility so great it rivals major market facility. And Dudley had that posted.
Of course. Aww. Of course.
And you know, it was a beautiful facility, but it needed work. But again, I'm working under my same philosophy is I'm not going to screw this up. We're going to take it easy. We're going to, as Jim Lord said, you've got that frog in that pan of hot water and you're bringing it to a boil very slowly without him knowing it. And that's pretty apt description of what we did. We took that station and transitioned it very gradually from beautiful music to AC.
How long did that take?
We had it done in 6 months. In 6 months.
Okay.
But that's where the heritage of Sunny 106.5 came from. We were I can say without doubt, the softest AC station in the country. Because and I knew that's what our people expected. They're going to accept some vocals, but they're still going to want them to be soft. We're not going to have, as George would have said, any fuzzy guitars.
Mm-hmm. No.
So we didn't play any fuzzy guitars at Sunny. So we gradually transitioned it over to that soft AC. And it was one of those things that you could, when you're at a radio station, you know when it's being accepted and you know when it's not. And I knew from those phone calls that this station was being accepted and it was on the verge of taking off. And I called my old consultant, Cal Casey, greatest consultant I ever worked for. And I said, Cal, we're sitting on a rocket ship here, and we just need a little boost, and we're going to take off. And I was able to persuade Cal to come down and work with Dudley, and together he and I programmed that station. And it was the most success that I've ever had, and the most satisfying most satisfying radio experience I've ever had, because everything we did kind of turned to gold. And then, you know, we made a lot of money, and we went from being what I love, which was Sunny and Kibi, 2 stations.
Yeah.
Then we buy up other stations. Fortunately, we don't buy a direct competitor, so it's not like I'm bringing the enemy into our fort. But we end up becoming our own little mini conglomerate.
Sure.
But it was great fun and the most fun I ever had in radio.
Because Dudley bought KKUS.
Bought KKUS.
I got back to Tyler because of that, because I spent 3 years in commuting to Longview. I was on Kicks, did mornings on KRFO, and then when I heard about Dudley buying it, because who owned it? John Borders, I believe, beforehand.
Yeah.
And so when Dudley bought it and bought KKUS, I remember talking, I guess Rick Guest, I reached out to, and I said, you know, is there a possibility for me of coming to Tyler in any capacity? Because the drive to Longview was just numbing.
Yeah. And
then we were able to switch from there. And then, you know, we were doing the infamous cornbread simulcast in the morning between KYKX and KKUS. And that was just insane, because I would sit there in the morning at 5 o'clock and they would fax over the logs, because they would send the Kicks commercial logs, and I'd have to compare them with KKUS and make sure they matched time-wise. So when the breaks would happen, you know, it would go off without a hitch. It was craziness, but oh well.
Yeah, and kudos too should go to Rick Guest.
Yes.
Rick Guest came in and helped Dudley a great deal. Dudley's a radio guy. Dudley's really a program guy more so than a sales guy. And he needed Rick Guest to help him with the sales and to help him with the general management of it. And Rick Guest is the one that really encouraged Dudley, I think, I don't know that personally, but I think, to expand and buy other stations.
Yeah.
So, and see, that was the thing for, as I said, I've been a program director and an air talent always. I've never had, well, one brief period of time, but that's later.
You mean you never had to answer to anybody else?
Never had to answer anybody else. I was always the program director and the air talent. But that's a double-edged sword. Being on the air. What does Dan Fogelberg say, that the audiences are heavenly, but the traveling is hell?
Yeah.
Well, the audiences are heavenly on the radio, but the ratings are hell. And so you have a wonderful time being on the air. That's my happiest time of the day. I loved my listeners. It was fantastic. But every 6 months, we had to have the Come to Jesus meeting, which is the ratings.
Yes.
And fortunately, most of my stations did pretty well, but you could only enjoy it for a day. And then it was on to the next one.
That is so true.
You know what I tell Roseanne? I said, hey, we don't have to eat bar-ass hot dogs for another 6 months, baby.
We got our job for another 6 months.
Yeah, absolutely.
We got our job, but we got to start worrying about what we're going to do to keep our job 6 months down the road.
Yeah.
So when you're young, you handle that. But after 20 years of that, it starts to wear on you because you never, ever go home, at least I don't, and you're not thinking about it, and you're not worried about it, and you're not planning what you're going to do next. How are we going to defend this attack from our flank? And so you worry about it all the time. And I guess all jobs have worries, but you can never really relax in radio when you're a PD.
You should be doing news. Let me tell you something. It has been just this big awakening for me. And, Rosanna told me 30 years ago, you should do news. I'm like, you're insane. And when I was, went to KTBB, my first tour is production. And then I think after a year, Paul Gleiser's, our boss, says, Chuck, you should do news. If you can jock, you can do news. And I go, okay. So, and my whole thing would be, I had great people to study. Melissa Kaiser, John Sims. I would always ask questions, and they never made me feel stupid about stuff. So I would just, go from there. Even today, I'll sit there and we'll do a news meeting, or especially if I have a question about maybe web content or did I move the story around, and I'll talk to Melissa about that. What do you think about that? Yeah, I still bounce ideas off them. I think it's valuable.
Dave, I'm curious. I don't know if you want to talk about this or not, but that transition when Access One came in and bought it out, because I was still a baby jock at that point, and I was kind of brought in with that group. I had been working for Waller and then the buyout, but I didn't understand what was really happening when you decided to stay with Waller, and then. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Sure.
Okay, because I've always been curious, and I don't know if I had the courage to ask you when I worked for you at the time, because I had so much respect, and I was like, I got to do this right. I'm like, I don't want to mess this up.
I have no problems talking about it because it's all true.
Yes.
If you're telling the truth, you got nothing to worry about.
Right.
So let's backtrack a little bit.
Okay.
So we do great at Sunny.
Yes.
It enables Dudley to buy the ranch. Mm-hmm. It enables Dudley to buy KFRO. It enables Dudley to buy Kicks. So all of a sudden, we've got ourselves a little mini conglomerate there. Mm-hmm. And as Dudley told me at one Christmas party, we don't have to take a back seat to anybody. And we didn't, because we were top of the mountain.
Sure.
Sonny was still the big dog, but we had enough ratings that we carried everybody. Kicks was
I remember.
Not bad at all.
We called y'all the cash cow.
We were.
Yes.
We were. And when you do that, that starts attracting money. Mm-hmm. And this was a time that radio stations were being sold left and right. Mm-hmm. This was the top of the mountain of times to sell a radio station. Dudley Waller owns a station in Jacksonville, a station in Longview, and a station in Tyler. Access One out of New York City offers him $26 million.
Good for him.
$26 million. Unheard of for this market. Unheard of for some major markets. You can't turn that down.
No.
There's no way you can turn that down. But at the time, through things I don't understand. The way things were geographically laid out, Dudley was able to own more than his standard 4 stations because some of the stations were not licensed to the same metro. So when Dudley sold to Access One, he had, I believe, 7 stations, and Access One could only take those 4. And so from the day he sold the station, Dudley came in to me and said, look, just stay with me and we'll do something, and it'll be fun. We'll do something. So I really, at that point, I didn't really have any question. But you have to do your due diligence. So I go meet with the folks from Access One. We met at Heartland Ham for a little lunch, and they said, we're basically bankers, but we're excited about getting into radio, and of course we would love to have you. Basically bankers was
Did the antenna go up big time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at that point, I thought, well, I'm going to probably stay with Dudley. But I was still open. And so as the sale was moving along, no one reached out to me. I believe, but I don't know. I think Access One thought the talent was included in the sale. Dudley thought that it wasn't. So no one reached out to me. I guess they thought they didn't have to.
They assumed.
Yeah, they assumed.
Basically bankers.
Mike McVeigh was hired to consult.
I remember.
And I believe his name was Jerry King, who was the local guy.
Yep.
Crickets. Time goes on. Tick, 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 tick. Time goes on. Nobody contacts me. I just tell Dudley, we're just going to continue on, because I'll tell you this, Dudley. What they're going to do is they're going to take our station, and they're going to say it's sleepy, and they're going to say it's too slow, and the first thing they're going to do is they're going to pick up the tempo, and the first thing that's going to do is cut our audience in half. First thing they do is pick up the tempo. The second thing they do is they cut our audience in half. Anyway, the day before the sale is complete, the day before we're supposed to move over, I suppose Jerry King thinks I'm still coming. I don't know, but nobody's ever talked to me. Jerry King calls me on the air and says, hey, we hear you're pretty good. We'd like to talk to you.
The day before the sale is complete?
You're pretty good.
You're pretty good.
Well, isn't that special, Dave? What did you say? Did you say, yes, sir, I am pretty good?
I said, well, I think I'm going to stay with Dudley. And, that went over. You can imagine how that went over.
Yes.
Sure.
But that was it. That's the entire. Jerry King said, okay, well, thank you very much. Never talked to Mike McVeigh, never talked to anybody else. So that was the end of that. Mm-hmm. And then, when the word got out that I was going to stay, Rhonda decided to stay. And so the inevitable happened. They filed the no-compete. So we weren't able to go on the air immediately as we would like to have. If we could have gone on the air immediately, I think we would have transitioned more of our listeners. But so what we did was we programmed The Breeze, which was to be a light AC station, to give them what they were expecting from Sunny, but weren't any longer getting. But unfortunately, we went for 6 months with nobody on the air, and we had signal issues. Mm-hmm. We went from the biggest stick, and what was our great liner? From the tallest tower at maximum power. That's what we were.
Yeah, it wasn't 1,500 feet, right?
Yeah, and what
100,000.
I had listeners in Dallas, that played my games at stores in Dallas.
Wow.
But so we go to a station that's hamstrung by that, and we're hamstrung again by not having our people on the air. But we finally end up just having to sit out our no-compete. And when we sit out our no-compete, we go on the air, but we're already in quite a hole. And Sunny has lost half of its listeners. I think they went from a 10-8 to a 6.
I thought it was like a 4.
It might have been a 4.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes the absolute lesson on why you should never screw with a successful station.
Yeah, don't change it.
Yeah, they broke the Dave rule.
Yeah, they broke the day rule.
Big time.
I mean, it's that. It's like, KKUS with Big D and Bubba in the mornings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was the saddest day. Well, I can't say the saddest of my life, but one of the saddest days of my life. I'm sitting at home listening to the station the first day and listening to Charlie and Amy doing my show.
Yeah.
And it killed me. I mean, it made me physically ill.
Yeah.
And it was so hard. And that was the only day I ever listened to it.
You're a better man than I. When I left KKUS, I did not listen to that station for 6 years. It was like my feeling was, and if Rosanna was listening to it, I'd click it off. I'd say, they took my baby away from me.
I don't like to brag, and I don't like to toot my own horn here. Maybe it sounds like I've been tooting my own horn for an hour, but I don't.
No, it doesn't.
But
No.
they had to hire a part-timer at the offices in Jacksonville to take the phone calls from people who were complaining, "Where's Dave?"
Yeah.
And that's the ultimate compliment,
Truly.
that we had that many people.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So we had to hire somebody to take those phone calls. So anyway, needless to say that, Breeze, we didn't succeed. It's the only station I've ever had that I haven't been able to take to number 1. I think we could have done better had we had more time, but isn't that what everybody always says? Mm-hmm. When there's a lot of money involved, a lot of people come out of the woodwork and get in people's ears. Mm-hmm. And the decision was made that we need to brighten up the breeze. Why brighten up the breeze? We've already got a bright station over here on Sunny.
Sure.
But anyway, the decision was made, and Dave couldn't take that. And I talked to Rick Guest, and Rick said, "Well, why don't you come back to Sunny?" I did. And that was the hardest time of my life, too, because that's the only time that I wasn't the PD. I came back, and poor Rick Evans was the PD.
I remember that.
Oh, I had forgotten about that.
Having to deal with me. And again, things that you regret.
And he never, I don't think he'd ever programmed before that. I don't think so.
I don't know, but no one deserves to have to deal with me.
Well,
and so we come back, and Rick says, "Dave, just do your show and leave." And Dave can't do that.
yeah.
And so instead, I do my show, and then I go and sit in my office for 2 hours and fume. I don't really think that Rick and I had any confrontations, but I know it was a lot of pressure on Rick, and having to deal with me was not easy.
I don't think he liked dealing with me either. And I like him personally a lot. He had taught at my high school.
Yeah.
When I was in high school,
Yeah.
he was the theater teacher. He's back there now, and he's very successful at that. But he and I struggled to communicate well when he was the PD there, too.
Yeah.
I had forgotten about that, but it was tough.
Yeah, and it was tough, and we had a couple of books, and we were still down.
Yeah.
And that's the thing in radio. Once you lose that core audience, it's really hard to get them back because they make habits. They turn their life around what you do. So many people said, "Well, I know where I need to be when you do the Bozo Criminal. I
Yeah.
need to be Almost to Work. Or I know where I need to be when you do Common Bond." And their life was built around that. Well, their lives had moved on. So it's really, really hard once you lose those people to try to get them back. And we tried for a book or two. I don't remember how long it was. It wasn't very long. And we were struggling. We were at that 6, but we were a long way from that double digit that we were used to.
How was sales?
I don't know. I guess sales were okay. I kept myself out of that.
You're not programming, so you don't have to care about it.
I don't. But then Rick leaves, and so briefly I become back to be the PD again. Rick probably just got sick of Dave. I don't know, but he left. And then there is, as you have said, there's a shakeup. And a lot of it is because of, money, and I don't know really what the reasons were. But there was a shakeup, and the management was going to be different. And instead of being managed out of Sonny's office in Tyler, it was going to be managed out of the Longview office.
It was so strange because I don't know if Rick Guest ever indicated to you, but you could generally feel that he was being just gently pushed out.
Yeah.
You know.
He was headed toward retirement.
Yeah.
And so they had to make plans for the future.
Sure.
And their plans for the future was to promote their longest tenured person in management, which was in Longview.
Yeah.
But I had a gut feeling that was not good for me. And I've been in this business since 73, and I'm the only person you'll ever meet, or one of the very few you'll ever meet, that's never been fired. And excuse me, but I'll be damned if I was going to be fired in this situation. So I decided enough's enough. I've said all I've got to say. I've done the best I could do. I'm going to get off the air. I'm going to go and do something else. And at that point, our former general manager, or sales manager, I guess, Jenny Causey, was the general manager over at the Blaze in 99.3. And she said, "Hey, will you come over here and be my PD of the talk station?" Oh, that sounds like fun. So I moved over there, and that was
New experience.
new experience. Boy, was it ever!
Yeah.
And locally owned instead of
And
corporate
locally
again.
owned instead of corporate. The last locally owned, and we are still the last locally owned. And that was, I said 14, but it's 15 now, because it was 89. So we moved over there to do the talk station, and one thing led to the other, and I ended up doing a rhythmic / urban station, which is something I'm totally unqualified for, but we've been able to do okay.
You operated by the Dave rule. Don't
We
screw
operate
it up.
by the Dave rule. Don't screw that up. Yes, absolutely. Don't screw up the Blaze. The Blaze is a legendary heritage station here. Don't screw it up.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate enough to inherit one of the best staffs I've ever had, and they've all stayed with me. And we've just been a great team and have been able to be very successful.
I remember, having my chance. I'd been let go by KKUS, and you called me and said, "You want to make some pizza money?" Essentially, what it came down to is because you had some weekend programming that wasn't working, and he said, and Dave said, I can't see the blue screen of death when it comes up. So would you come over and look at things and, just watch for stuff, make some notes for me and the engineering staff. And then I said, well, okay, sure. I'll come over and do that. So, and I think it was maybe a couple of months. And I'm not sure how the transition worked, but we were talking and you called me and said, we're going to be doing sports talk. Would you produce it? And I said, I don't know what to do. and I think we both kind of didn't know what to do. And so I thought, well, they need music beds. So I started from there.
That's always a good start. That's always a good play.
I built that. But I was so fortunate over there, working with you, and something that interested me, but kind of, I didn't know what I was doing, but working with, Reed Kerr on the afternoon show, Sports Radio Live, and also Brian Houston, having these guys say, well, we want you to be part of the show. Because it would have been very easy for them to say, you'll punch the buttons and make sure I get from 0 to 0 in one piece. And they didn't. It was like, be part of the show. So that was just really, really valuable.
Well, that station was a struggle for us.
It was, yeah.
The frequency signal is not the best, but I think of all the things you've ever done, I think that the sports interaction you had with Reed and Brian is some of the best work you've ever done.
Oh, and we had fun.
Yeah, it was obvious.
And it was things that we could do. And, like I would sit there in the morning and I would have my laptop in one of the offices and I would look at ESPN or whatever. I would put together sports clips and We had what was the voiceover guy for the station from New Orleans? I forget his name. And we had
Steve.
Steve
Something.
We had specific parts, and I would build customized intros for each day, and then I would give it to Reed and Brian, and I would say, okay, these are the bits that you have, and it would be this thing that could easily get them over the first 20 because they would discuss it, and I would say, okay, I also have them individually in case you needed to play back, and it was just a lot of fun just to do that, and they were very different shows because Reed was more sports culture, and Brian was sports. But to me, it was such a challenge because I'm producing, communicating with them, answering calls. Sometimes you have giveaways and to do all of that.
Well, those two were super talented guys, and given the right situation, either one of them could have been really successful.
Oh yeah,
because they were good. I'll
Very
put them up
good.
against anybody.
Oh yeah, and I would tell them both. You're the type of guys. If I said, "Here's a hairbrush," sit in the corner and do 2 hours of sports talk, they could do it.
Yeah.
Where me, I mean, I had to do it for 3 days when Brian was out with strep throat, but I had to have notes. I had to have sound bites available to go in emergencies. And I also had to have medication because I was so nervous. It was one of those things that I would tell people I was exhilarated and terrified.
And Reed was a funny guy.
Reed was
one of those guys that's naturally funny, and that's hard to do.
Yes.
And he was naturally funny.
I have never met a guy doing play-by-play on football that would drop an Elvis Costello lyric fragment talking about a touchdown. And it was just, it was crazy. But he's really, really, really intelligent. And Brian, had that big market sound.
Yeah.
It's like Bill Coates.
Yeah.
When I came to town, I remember hearing Coates and going, I get he was a BB at the time, but this is in the 80s, and I was going, who's this guy?
And that's not easy. What we do is easy because we've got 15-second intros, talk over them, and we're done.
Yes.
And there was a time there that Jenny said, why don't you come on? And I said, Jenny, I don't think I can do this. I do 15-second bits, And so I called my friend Jack Shell, who's one of the great talented people of all time in this business. And I said, Jack, Jenny's kind of wanting me to do a talk show. What do you think? And Jack said, well, let me tell you, they asked me the same question one time. And he said, and I came in and did it. And he said, about halfway through the show, I said, hey, guys, that's all I got. And I thought, okay, if Jack Shell can't do it, I can't do it.
Yeah.
So I have immense respect for those guys because you're on that tightrope for 3 hours and you got to come up with something.
You have to be a very special person. Your internals have to be wired to where you don't think. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
What is the line from Maverick? Don't think, just do.
Yeah.
It's like you're not thinking, you're just talking, but that thinking has to have already happened enough to where you're...
If you think in our business, that's the worst thing you can do because you can think yourself right into a panic attack.
True.
You can think yourself into just blocking. Mm-hmm. And, it's like my favorite quote from George Allen, don't be too smart.
No.
Oh, right.
No.
Don't overthink things. And that's what you got to be careful of. For the first few years that I was doing mornings, I knew what I was going to do on every break before I went on the air. Mm-hmm. I had every break lined out, and here's what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. And my ultimate security blanket was I wrote down Rick Watson's name and put it on a piece of paper because I had this deathly fear. He was my newscaster.
I remember.
That I would blank and not know his name. Because, sometimes when you're on the air, weird things happen.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I had this deathly fear that I would go, hey, and now it's time to go to with the news. And so every day for years, I wrote Rick Watson on a little piece of paper just so I'd be sure I didn't forget his name.
No, absolutely.
As time went by, I quit scripting out the show because as time went by, it became less of Dave and more of the listeners. And so much of my show was guided by what the listeners did on any given day. So I always had benchmarks, and we always did those benchmarks, but sometimes things, real life got in the way, and the things that the listeners came up with prevented me from having my show.
When I always think of your benchmarks, it's always, the stupid criminals.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, if we have a news story, there was one a month ago where 2 kids in Palestine robbed a pizza joint because they wanted pizza. And I said, stupid criminals right there. I said, I have a friend that would love that story.
I started Stupid Criminals at KTYL all those years ago. And it was in the very infancy of the internet. And I had a listener in White Oak, Serge Walters, who was a fan. And he said, hey, I'm gonna create a website for you. And what exactly is this website thing? And he said, well, we're going to put it up and people will go and be able to read your Bozo Criminal every day on there. And I thought, wow, that's kind of cool. And again, it was in the infancy. And so lo and behold, one day out of the clear blue sky, back in those days, USA Today used to do the top 10 hottest websites of the week. And they picked ours.
Wow.
And it was like, are you kidding me? We're putting zero effort into this thing. We're just putting what I did on the air, and USA Today has picked it as one of the top
That's
websites.
cool.
That is too awesome.
Yeah. And hey, it's still out there, folks. www.bozocriminal.com. And occasionally I update it. But
cool.
but we have the entire archive since 1987, maybe?
Wow.
Can't be 87. 97?
Probably 97, yeah.
97. But they're all out there.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So and
BozoCriminal.com.
thanks to Serge for doing that for all these years.
He still updates it for you?
He still updates it for me.
That's amazing.
Any Bozo criminal ever contact you?
No.
What are you talking about me for?
The BBC contacted me one day. One day I was at Sunny, and at 6:15 the phone rang, and it was somebody from the BBC. They wanted to do a story on it. That was very early. See, I missed the boat. Those guys wrote books about them. What was it called? Stupid Criminals. There was a whole series of books they wrote.
Really?
And they even had a TV show. And I forget. But we did the Bozo Criminals first, and then other people picked up on it.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was fun. It was a lot of fun. So. And one more memory
Yes.
about this guy.
Yeah.
You worked for me overnights.
I did. Now, this is part-time in 90?
Yeah. And so at KTYL, we had a big whiteboard.
Yes.
And everything on that whiteboard was what we talked about. So you were never without something to talk about. You could look up at the whiteboard. Chuck's coming in to work 6 to midnight one day a week. And the guy comes in on Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock and writes down everything that's on that whiteboard so he'll be prepared. And I was so impressed because this is a guy that's worried about what he's going to sound like at 2 o'clock in the morning, worried enough that he's coming in here and writing all that down. And I thought, this guy's okay.
Well,
he's got a future.
And the shifts that I worked for you, and I'd been out of radio for a year. I was doing cable sales for a little over a year, which just, it's like the Lady Kenmore, where Robert Wallace says, selling Lady Kenmore suck. Well, it sucked, but it also made it to where I never said bad things about salespeople because it's hard. It's really, really hard. But I remember talking to you about the job, and it was, I want to say, it was like Saturday night from 11 to 6 and Sundays from 1 to 8. Just awful hours, except I didn't get the memo they were awful. I was so pleased about being back into radio and being able to punch buttons and do music on the radio. I just had the best time ever. I think I was there maybe 3 months, and then, KNUE came back.
Yeah, the radio's, I think, the only thing I can really do well, evidenced by that one of those times while I was waiting for Janie to call me with another gig at KTYL. I applied for a job at Middlecoff Ford in Dallas to sell Fords. And they had one of those psychological tests that you have to take.
Really?
And you, the questions have no relation to anything. If you saw a bluebird and a redbird in a tree, which one would you be more likely to be drawn to? I don't know, something like that. Just questions that have nothing to do with me. And obviously I failed because they didn't offer me a job. So I couldn't sell cars, but for some reason or other I could.
But you can program radio just fine.
I can do radio.
This has been another episode of The Unknown Morning Show.
I'm Mandee Montana.
And I'm Chuck McKinley.
This is our show to explore radio,
Podcasting.
gear,
And the gearheads that use the gear.
and making money with a hot mic.
And other stuff in between.
We'd love for you to follow us on social media as well. Follow us on Facebook at The Unknown Morning Show and Instagram at The Unknown Morning Show. See us on YouTube at The Unknown Morning Show.
Thank you for listening to The Unknown Morning Show.
I'm Mandee Montana.
I'm Chuck McKinley. And remember, be kind and rewind.